Clayton? Right, then, let's see. I got so many emails today from students. Yeah, okay. He's excused. Pablo here. Val is excused. Michaela? Tom?
Here.
Kelly? Piper? Maynard? Michael Maynard? Let me check just in case. No, nothing today. Jason? Peak here, I saw him, I think. Yeah. And Rosie. All right. Did you guys work on your surveys yet? Before I get to you, let me briefly talk about some basic do's and don'ts of surveys. This is not meant to be a replacement for stats knowledge, but kind of a summary. Simple key points. The first point is sample selection. There are samples that are ideal, there are samples that can only be achieved. So we will talk about target population versus actual population. If your target population is not, if your actual population you're sampling from is not anywhere close to your target population, things could go pretty bad. The biggest example of this, 1948 presidential elections. Before the election, Gallup, which was pretty much the survey company those days, did an election poll, and they predicted that Thomas Dewey, which was governor of New York those days, Republican candidate, not trademark, would win in a landslide against President Harry S. Truman. And there was a famous headline of a Chicago paper. Let me show you that headline. Dewey defeats Truman. Images. Of course, this is President Truman actually holding it after the election. Chicago Daily Tribune. Okay. And we, of course, now know that Truman won that election comfortably. So what went wrong in terms of the Gallup poll? So I kind of gave you a hint that it's about the difference between the target population and the actual population you end up sampling from. Target population here should be all citizens who are eligible and likely to vote. Then you look at many election polls, they kind of differ sometimes, especially quite a few months away from the election. They do the poll on registered voters, but a little bit more sophisticated polls are based on likely voters, where they actually predict who's likely to vote. They also ask people whether they are likely to vote. Obviously, Gallup's poll was very different in its composition. And the actual population that voted. Let me kind of give you an extreme example. Suppose you're going to do a poll for 2024 presidential election, just for the not primary, but the final election, general election, and you only called people from Kentucky. And what do you think that poll is going to say? Yeah, probably Republican is going to end up winning. Why? Because the percentage of Republicans in Kentucky, or percentages of people who are likely to vote for Trump in Kentucky, is a lot higher compared to the entire nation. Yes, we have, electoral vote system that's different. Sometimes even if you win the popular vote, you don't necessarily win the election. It happened 5 times in US history. Bush 1, Bush 2, Trump. I think Abraham Lincoln was one of them, and there was another one. But in this case, it wasn't an issue about popular vote versus electoral college vote. Obviously, the sample that they had was a lot different in terms of its Republican content compared to the actual sample. What do you think was the possible reason those samples were different, other than Gallup's internal bias, which, for the sake of argument, let's assume that's not the case? Do you know how they conducted polls those days? Any guesses? Huh? No, that's an expensive thing to do. Plus, when are you going to do it? If you do it during the day, you're going to get only women those days, because men are at work. Obviously, you don't want your sample to be only women. If you can't do that, what are you going to do? and you want to do these things relatively quickly. So you call them, right? These were phone tolls. Registered voters. Actually, those days, they randomly called people. In each area code, you can generate random 7 digits and call people, right? It's not that complicated. So, what's wrong with that? Remember, this is 1948. Obviously, nobody had a cell phone. What was the key difference between, do you think, people who actually owned the phone line compared to people who did not? Huh? Wealth. It's not like today. If you want to own it, these days they actually give the landline away. If you have a cable contract, you can get a landline for free, almost. But nobody wants a landline anymore. But those days, you actually had to wait quite a bit unless you paid some money. People with landlines were a lot more likely to be wealthier compared to those who did not. That means you only reach people that have a landline. And it wasn't as bad as it is today, but as far as the politics is concerned, what's the difference between poor people and rich people? As far as American policy is concerned. Huh?
There's a lot of ways to answer that question.
Use one of them.
Tax bracket.
No, but as far as the elections are concerned, politics is concerned. Sure, that tax brackets are different, but as far as politics, are rich people or were rich people those days more likely to vote Republican compared to Democrat?
No, the party switch.
Hmm?
But the party switched it, so we're more likely to vote Democrat.
Yeah. I mean, back in those days, independent of race, rich, wealthier people were a lot more likely to be Republican. Especially after, FDR, Democratic Party has become the party of the poor people. Because it was the Republican president of a Republican Party that got U.S. into a recession, Herbert Hoover,